presentation before morning tea of the City of Sydney, and Craig Chung, Councillor of the City of Sydney, will be making that presentation. I'd like to welcome him to the stage. Over to you, Chris. Craig.
Good morning, everyone, and it's great to be here. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, I'm a councillor at the City of Sydney. A slight correction: this is not a project of the City of Sydney. This is a project that I've been working on with a number of parties to develop a collaborative model for smart city development. I also spent 4 years at the City of Ryde, which is a suburban council in Sydney. That council is home to the innovation CBD of Sydney in Macquarie Park. A lot of the things that I'm going to speak to you about today, I think you've heard some of it in different contexts. There's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of days about different aspects of smart cities and how we're approaching that at all levels of the government. It's really interesting to hear Claire talk about the Smart Cities project from the federal government, and I'll refer to that a little later. But it's really heartening to see things like the Western Sydney deal has really, I think, brought to life this idea of collaboration between all levels of government. And there were a lot of sceptics around at the time, but they pulled it off, and it seems to be working quite well. So, of course, today I'm talking about cities. But not about the buildings, not about the built structure, more about the inhabitants, more about the smart communities that we have in cities. I'm also going to talk about some of the seemingly intractable problems that we face as city makers and the challenges that we have as city leaders to help our citizens live in cities which are much more livable. I want to talk about how we're going to bring the cities together, academics, thought leaders, institutions like universities, and of course, how we bring them all together to face some of these enormous challenges. But with these enormous challenges come incredibly exciting opportunities. And then I want to tell you about this collaborative model that we're working on. So, why are we talking about cities? We're talking about cities a lot. You've seen some of the data in that last presentation, but over the last couple of days. The growth of the middle class throughout the world is placing great pressure on our cities. The global ageing population, these mega trends of this century that have been ballooning for some time, just creating a great strain on our cities. And very importantly, this growing inequality that sometimes arises from these mega trends. This rapid urbanisation of the world is just an enormous problem, and you've all seen some of the data. But we know that 70% of the world's population is going to be living in urban environments by 2050. We know that most inventions come out of cities. 80% of the economy of the world is out of cities. And then the flip side to all of this happening in cities is that 70% of the world's CO2 emissions come out of cities. And these are just enormous challenges that we face as city leaders. Now, when we talk about cities, we're not talking about just cities like Sydney, we're talking about these cities that are growing at enormous rates. And not just capital cities like Adelaide, where we're seeing it's going to grow to 1.5 million or 2 million people, but even the regional cities, where as people move into those cities. When we heard from the rail company yesterday, Clara, talking about this opportunity to grow cities, it's further condensing people into city space. And as this rapid urbanisation occurs, this growing technological revolutions around us every day. You know, we talk about big data. We're talking about trillions of combinations of dirty data, which is sort of not that unusual for people who are dealing with difficult data problems. And yet, as local government leaders, we still are grappling with some of the basic issues about how are we actually dealing with data, how we're dealing with some of the privacy issues, how we're dealing with collecting the data, and in fact, how we're converting some of our existing data from a generation into useful format. The big country, the big population debate has re-emerged in the last month or so. It's always been simmering away in the background. It seems to come up at regular times. But there's no doubt that some parts of our country, and I'm from Sydney so I can speak about that, some parts of our city are struggling with the rate and the amount of growth that's happening. If you look at the growth centres in Sydney, whether it's in the Inner West Council, whether it's in Sydney, Parramatta, Canterbury, Bankstown, 38,000 new homes need to be built in Sydney every year just to keep up with the number of people who are moving into Sydney. That doesn't account for the number of homes for the latent demand that's been there from many years of stagnant construction approvals. 38,000 homes every single year, people moving into our city. And Sydney is going to grow to 8 million people. We've seen this sort of data. Quarter of Australia's economy comes out of Greater Sydney. We have to almost double our housing and 800,000 jobs by 2036. And so for those of you who are in local government and for those of you who are in Sydney, some of you are from these councils. And I note that there's the entire council team from the Canterbury Bankstown Council. I think that's fantastic that the leadership shown from that council to come and to learn more about how they can actually shape their city. But just to really emphasise the rate of this growth and how enormous it is. Over the next 5 years, the forecast housing growth in Sydney, the top 10 LGAs in Sydney will produce 131,450 homes. That's the latest data we've got. Canterbury Bankstown is going to be producing about 12,000 new homes over the next 5 years. Parramatta, 22,500 homes over the next 5 years. It's just enormous growth. So that context of huge changes in population and density and urbanisation, where does the smart city fit into this, and how does this sort of fit into what we're talking about today? If I asked each of you what is a smart city, I think I'd have a different definition from every single person in the room. So I'd like to just talk about some of the things that I think about. Let's start with the notion that buildings, roads, parks, sensors are not smart. People are smart, people enable technology, people invent, they create, and they implement their ideas using technology. So I think it's important to remember that smart cities are about people. The other thing I'd like to say is that smart cities are not an end to itself. Smart cities are a process. Smart cities are ways in which we can utilise technology to create communities, a more prosperous, sustainable, fairer city. So when I ask my 74-year-old mum what she thinks a smart city is, she gives me a very blank look and she has no idea what a smart city is. But if I ask her what are the sort of things she wants in a city that she lives in, she'll tell me, well, I want to be able to get to golf easily without traffic. I want clean air, I want clean water. I want the children to be able to live close. I don't think she means me, I think she means the grandchildren, but she wants the kids to be able to live close. But she also wants them to be able to have an education, to be close to healthcare, to have a paying job, which then leads to things like housing affordability. She has a social conscience. She wants people to be able to have a roof over their head, something to eat. And for her at her age and my father's age, they want access to healthcare. So they want to be able to get to those things. So each of those things might be somewhere on your livability index for a city in a different order. But I think we can agree that some of those things that she talked about presented to us as city leaders are some of the problem statements that we all grapple with. So her problem statements are congestion. She wants to be able to get to golf. So she talks about congestion, mobility and access. She talks about social equity. She talks about access to education, to employment, affordable healthcare. She wants a healthy and clean environment. So if I think about smart cities being about people and about the sort of problem statements we want resolved to make a city that we want to live in, I like to define a smart city as a city that you want to live in. The smart city part of that is just the process to get there. So just let's remember that first bit, that smart people make a smart city. So as we go about our day just thinking about smart cities and some of the things that we've talked about over the last couple of days, I just want to re-emphasise. So I've said this, smart cities are about people first and foremost. Cities are about communities, hundreds of communities, thousands of communities, but at the core of this is people. If you think about places like New York, which is an older historic city which is dealing with many issues that urban environments deal with on a huge scale. New York is developing enormous numbers of different communities, but at the core of this is people. If you think about the presentation that Clayton did yesterday, it talks about people. It talks about people being at the core of everything they do. So smart cities are about people. And the first step as leaders, we need to make sure that we're engaging with people. Now, citizens demand access. They have so much capacity to get information themselves. They demand that we're accountable, and they also demand that we're accessible. So our problem propositions have got to articulate what people really want, so we need to talk to them. Now, data quantification is a quantification, or one of the ways in which we can think about citizens' experiences. Now, data doesn't lie, it can be manipulated, and that's not the only thing we should look at, but data is a very important tool for us to be able to think about what it is that our people want and what they're doing. And using technology enhances our way that we do that. So we need to make sure that we include citizens. Think about some of the data insights that are available to us. Now, you've seen some of these ideas over the last couple of days, but thinking about how you can go down to really close levels, talking to your communities and getting feedback from your communities, whether it's talking to them directly or whether it's analysing data. You can understand things like tourism. What is the impact on the economy of your suburbs, cities and communities? And how do you actually gather data through live financial transactions, for instance, through booking data. Now, a lot of that's only available through partnerships, and we've talked a lot about partnerships and collaboration, but that's some of the data that would be really useful to some of you in your local government areas. And then if you think about the events that you do, the amount of money that we spend on events and activities, about actually measuring the impact of that. What is the impact of our spend, and really understanding day to day? If you think about looking at, for instance, retail expansion here in Melbourne, they do footfall counts, and I know that they're improving that every single day. But imagine if you could put together the footfall counts along with live retail trading data, live transportation data, live location data, and that would really give you some insights into the economic activity of your city, where it's working, where it's not, where do you need to reinvest, and where do you need to do some more work. So, of course, if cities are about people, smart cities aren't led by technology. And I think that's a fundamental view that I have, that it's important that technology doesn't lead smart cities. It just enables smart ideas to come to life. If you think about some of the projects that the smart city funding has gone to from the federal government, none of those were technology-led. If you think about things like the Barrier Reef, there's a problem statement. There's a problem statement about water quality and runoff from rural lands onto the reef, and how we're going to monitor that and track that. And technology was able to bring that to life. If you think about urban density and protecting fauna and flora from urban density, that was the problem statement, and it was just technology that enabled that to come to life. So, for those of you in local government, I wonder how many of you have been presented with technology ideas by staff. I wonder if you recognise any of these sorts of sensors that you've been presented to by staff. You know what we need to do, guys? We need to go out and we need to monitor the air quality. So there's these great new sensors, and we should install them in every park. And there's a fabulous, and we can also track the vehicle fleet around the suburb and know where they're going. But how many of you have actually been presented with a problem statement first? As politicians, we all think that we know the answers to everything. Of course, I do. We go to council meetings thinking that every day. But honestly, how many of us have really thought about the problem statement, interrogated data, talked to the people before being presented with these wonderful gadgets that vendors often like to bring to us? I hear from different councils all the time about them becoming a smart city. and I hear about them saying, you know, we're really smart. What we're going to do is we're going to install all these smart garbage bins and smart sensors in our parks. And when you ask them, where did that come from? What made you decide to do that? Well, that's smart. That's what people are doing. That's just smart. And I don't think that that's the answer that we need. I think we need to be asking the questions about what is the problem that we're trying to solve. Smart city problem statements are limitless. So we need to spend more time talking to people, 90% of our time. So often, our smart city solutions are vendor driven, and I apologise to the vendors in the room. Your job is to sell technology to us often. But we need to actually move vendors and technology to the side a little bit and just say, what is the problem that we're actually trying to solve? And then how can we apply the technology to doing that? And then finally, we all say this, I know, but it's absolutely essential that they are collaborative. We need to bring together the citizens, the city, the private sector, all levels of government together to make this work. So if we don't do that, this is bound to fail, and that's why the Western Sydney deal is so exciting. It creates a framework for government to work together, and citizens and institutions, governments, private enterprise will fill in those bits, like applying for smart city grants. So I talked earlier about some of these urban problems and what they are for us, but of course governments have got problems too, dealing with that, and dealing with some of these ideas about smart cities. We've got shrinking budgets, we know that. We've got differing priorities. In Sydney, we have this problem that is of ageing infrastructure, along with this need to roll out new infrastructure every day. We've got diminishing environmental resources, rising economic and social inequality, and of course these massive shifts in demographics that we I'll look after it now. Thank you. So, so there's some of the things that, of course, that we all face as politicians. But citizens are demanding that we actually deal with it. They're saying to us, you really need to respond to these complex solutions. And then, of course, companies are working in an undefined space with government about dealing with technology and data as cities try to grapple that problem themselves. But there's a lot of people here from government, so we're now starting to see how political leaders are starting to put their political capital behind this. In New South Wales, the largest spend on transport infrastructure in the history of New South Wales, $1.5 billion a month being spent on transport. And so governments are seeing that as a way to accelerate growth, jobs, equality. So, of course, economic development has always been one of those things that governments like to do, to create a productive and livable city. And they're also, government's becoming much more committed to providing access and mobility to improve social equity. And I think the Western Sydney deal is a great example of that. The North-South Rail line in the Western Sydney deal, for those of you who don't know, was controversial in the sense that there were many people seeking to have the rail line actually an east-west rail line. But the North-South Rail line is as much about that new city as it is about social equity, job equity, access to healthcare and education for people in that new city. So genuinely, governments are doing things which actually, and politicians are putting their capital behind these things. So cities largely work without operating standards for digital technology. We've heard about the Microsoft presentation about having this one platform where all of your data can go in and it'll all come out nice and clean. Cities across the world don't work with the same standard. They don't have cohesive solutions. They're never holistic. There's, they'll come along with one idea and then there's another idea to plug in, another idea to plug in. And you've seen a lot of presentations about how we try to bring that together. The Microsoft presentation is one. The Newcastle project is another. So bringing these things together to take a holistic approach. The old model of procurement means that cities don't like to have long-term relationships with single vendors. We need to think about how we can deal with that. Having long-term relationships with some vendors or with some partnerships. And then we talked, yesterday I mentioned about this risk-averse nature of government. They don't want to fail. They are scared to fail, so they don't actually do it. On the other side of the point, you've got solution providers. They come along and they enhance this lack of cohesion by coming along and just fixing one little problem. They very rarely cooperate to come with holistic solutions, and then often vendors come and they just want to sell us a product and move on. It's not all doom and gloom though. There's a whole lot of problems that we all face here, and I don't need to tell you, you all leaders in your own fields, but there are some really good things that are happening to try and bring this together. I've mentioned the city deal, and it's fantastic. In New South Wales, innovation's a priority. The state government's putting money into technology and innovation. They've opened up a new centre in Sydney for innovators. Cities like Adelaide, like Melbourne, like Newcastle, are all thinking about how they are going to solve some of these problems, and they looked at the problem statements and starting to actually use technology to fix them. Corporate world is on board. Of course, they want to sell some stuff, so they need to start thinking about how are we actually going to do this with long-term relationships. I like it that in Macquarie Park, there's a Macquarie Park Innovation District is now an amalgam of a number of corporations and government together to help incubate ideas. So with all these problems, how are we going to fix them? Well, we need to think about a new model for public-private partnerships. We need to think about how are we going to promote comprehensive city solutions that are integrated. The concept of PPPs is nothing new, but any of you have tried to procure in the digital space with government with RFPs and tenders know that the process is exasperating. It's a really difficult process. So I propose that we need to reset this PPP vision for government and private industry because this is a rapidly changing world. The world has changed and we need to do something about it. So the procurement needs to be problem-led, not solution-led. And as I said to you yesterday, this idea that politicians always like to have a solution for a problem we didn't know we had. Just say, for example, a city wanted to build a big motorway, here in Victoria, say for instance, they will just go out and they'll procure a motorway. They'll say, we need to get more cars along this road because it's congested, so let's build another motorway. But perhaps what they need to do is they need to say, well, what are the problems that we're facing rather than build that new motorway? Is the problem about access to health? Is it about time of travel? Is it about mobility broadly? Is it about equity? And really look at those things and then be able to feel confident to go out to solution providers in a way in which the solution provider can look at the problem and come with solutions and that we're able to procure that. Now I recognise that takes a revolution in the way that we procure things in government, a complete revolution. We need to be brave and if we don't, we're going to miss out altogether. So rather than prescribe the solution, we need to describe the problem. So what's in it for us and what's in it for industry? Well, in government over the next 10 years around the world, $3.5 trillion US is going to be spent on smart city technology. And that will escalate to 41 trillion US over 20 years. So for us spending that money in government over the next 20 years, we want to make sure we get it right. And what's in it for vendors? Well, that money's there if they can actually work out a way to work with government, to work with citizens, to work with institutions to get it right. So Connect Sydney is a project that I've been working on. It's about a platform bringing together all of these stakeholders into the one place where we can co-develop solutions, accelerate scaling, where we can bring citizens to the front and centre of what we're doing, where we can bring institutions, government and private enterprise into the place. So the whole idea is that it is this future-facing platform that just has the problem at front and centre. We want to be looking at problems that are urgent, that need fixing. We want to look at problems that are viable. We don't want to be fighting government. We want to be collaborating with government. We want to have things that will have an impact on the city's cost base and the quality of life. We want to have things that are scalable, things that are able to be taken to other cities in the world, and we want to be able to do that through standardisation. They have to be standardised problems. So, second last slide. So this is our blueprint. We have a thought leadership engine, a centre where we have city leaders, where we have institutional leaders, where we have people around the world thinking about what it is that we want for our cities. We have our solutions lab where we are developing these solutions. And then there's Scale Network where we can partner with other cities around the world and take some of those ideas that we have and scale them to other parts of the world. So that's Connect Sydney. If anybody would like to talk to me after about it, I'm very happy to expand on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Craig. That was absolutely fascinating. Dealing with the big things, the interconnection between people, connectivity and governance, which is around the heart of everything that categorises the reason why people come together in cities. I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer one question and before we break for morning tea. So would you please raise your hand if you have a question for Craig, or you would want to ask at least one person wanting to ask a question. Everyone's keen to get, just over there.
G'day Craig, my name's Tom Groscott from Transport for New South Wales. My question is about what do you see as the pathway through the traditionally competitive layers of government and the barriers between government and the private sector to try and bring together these collaborations when we start from a fairly adversarial history?
So I'm not sure that if you mean adversarial as in between vendors and government, or is it between agencies?
In all directions. I mean, it seems to be a feature of the way we work across, between. I mean, we put everything out for competitive tender. We put it, there's internal political adversarialism. Then between, we've seen plenty of it on display here.
I'll talk to you a bit more offline, Tom, about a couple of these things, but Connect Sydney has done some work with Transport for New South Wales, I think the idea of this new model of PPP is actually taking it away from the procurement and testing and failing and succeeding process away from government by itself, putting it into a place where the private enterprise invests, where government invests, and we're not talking just money, we're talking about sponsorship, really. Cities are the place where you're going to roll out solutions, so you need to have cities as a part of this. And citizens, so bringing them into that one space where you can test and trial things in a not an adversarial way, where you can fail, where you can do that, and where cities and politicians feel safer that there's a place where this is happening, where they are not the procurer, where they are not going to fail, but also where they can take successful outcomes and trial them. That is happening in a number of different places, and I think that and it's pretty exciting. I'll talk to you more about some of the Transport for New South Wales ones that we've worked with.